Hello, my name is Matt, but you may know me as the Tattoo Robot. Today, I've got another fantastic drawing tutorial for you. This is part of a series where I'll be illustrating 3 cocktails, each in a unique tattoo style. Traditional, neo-traditional, and my personal favorite, Nu Skool. So, sharpen those pencils, or charge up your Apple Pencil, and let's dive in. First things first, let's draw the base of our glass. A simple circle will do the trick. Now, some of you might be thinking, that's not a circle, it's an oval or an oblong. Well, you're wrong. It is a circle, it's just drawn in perspective. Now let's add the top of our glass and the sides. For this example, the top of the glass is the same size circle as the base, and 2 straight lines connect them to form a cylinder. If I erase this bottom line, it looks like a very basic non-transparent cup. But we're not stopping there. Let's push it further. If I add a half circle or even a full circle to the top to represent the lip of the cup, then add an inner circle near the bottom and connect them at the edges, we've got an interior of the glass. Now it's starting to look like something a basic cocktail might be served in. But wait, it's empty. Oh no. Time to fill it up. Another circle will represent the surface of our beverage. Let's add some ice. To draw an ice cube, I'll start with 3 simple square shapes, then I'll refine them just a little bit by rounding out the edges. But you don't have to do it this way. For a traditional tattoo style, I might keep those edges sharp and clean. Now, let's add a bunch of these cubes to the glass, erasing where they overlap, since we're not worrying about transparency right now. Let's pretend this is the glass I'll use for my project. So, I'll add some line work and maybe a straw. How do you draw a straw, you ask? Same as before. Start with a cylinder, but use smaller circles and space them farther apart. Alright, now that we know how to draw a glass, let's try out some other types of glassware using the same method. But first, I'll add a handle to this example to turn it into a mug. To do that, I'll just draw another cylinder, but this time I'm adding a couple of bends to give it that classic handle shape. Here are 3 quick examples. For champagne flute, I'll start with a circle as the base, adding a thin cylinder for the stem, then placing another circle at the top. I'll connect the top to the stem with curves that are straighter near the top, that taper down and round out at the bottom. For a hurricane glass, it's the same concept as the champagne flute, but this time the stem is made up of multiple circles at different angles to give it that unique shape. Finally, a pint glass has gentle curves that taper slightly at the center. Now that we've got all this practice under our belts, let's move on to the full project. It's time for the 3rd installment in this cocktail series, and today we're working on my favorite tattoo style, Nu Skool. This approach is so much fun because it allows the artist to exaggerate the artwork. There aren't a whole lot of rules when it comes to Nu Skool. Ideally, you want variations in line width, thicker lines as parts get closer to the viewer and thinner as they recede into the background. I personally like to mix in some colored line work, but it's not necessary. And for parts that are even further in the distance, I might drop the line work altogether. But that's not what we're here for now, is it? Let's concentrate on a singular image, this cocktail. For this one, I decided on a stemless margarita glass. My initial sketch begins with some circles that I've turned into a cylinder. Sounds familiar, right? Once the size looks correct, I'm going to add a circle for the base and one for where that cylindrical portion meets the bowl-shaped upper portion. And let's not forget the walls of the glass. These lines essentially run parallel to their outer counterparts. However, this glass does get a little bit thicker as it gets towards the bottom, so I'm going to taper these lines towards the center ever so slightly. Now that I've got the shape of the glass the way that I want it, I'll start working on those customized details. Mine, of course, is going hand in hand with those other 2 cocktails in the series by carrying along that Myrtle Beach theme. But you can do whatever you want with this artwork. Get creative. I'm only here as a guide. For my artwork, I'm adding a prickly pear cactus. Why? Because they're growing all over the dunes next to the beach. I even picked one, and it picked back. I thought prickly pears had long, sharp spikes, but not the South Carolina variety. Instead, I spent 30 minutes picking tiny fibers out of my poor little fingies. But I got my revenge. I cleaned the fruit, cut it in half, and used it as garnish. Before we dive into line work, let's take a moment to discuss composition. This artwork is Nu Skool, but it could go so much further. Nu Skool thrives on exaggeration, foreshortening, and playing with the flow of the design, like shaping the artwork into a bold S or a C curve. One of the most exciting things about Nu Skool is the freedom to mess with perspective. Imagine seeing the bottom, the front, and the top of the glass all at once. With Nu Skool, that's entirely possible. But don't worry, I'll save that level of craziness for later videos. For me, the most important thing about Nu Skool is readability. If the viewer's brain doesn't recognize what they're looking at within a few seconds, then I feel like I've missed the mark. That said, there's a counterpoint to my perspective. Sometimes the fun of Nu Skool is in the discovery. Letting viewers take a closer look to uncover the mystery of the artwork can be just as rewarding. Now it's time for the line work. Here, I'm making my lines less curvy. I like the look of a line that runs straight and turns at an angle rather than one that's perfectly smooth. But that's just me. If you want to do things nice and smooth and clean, go right ahead. That works. It's your artwork. For my lines, the closer they are to the front, the thicker they are. They taper to a point as they move toward the back, creating a sense of depth. Inside the glass, I'm using magenta tones to illustrate the beverage. As you can see, I've imported a picture of a real Prickly Pear Margarita to color sample from. So it makes a ton of sense to use colored line work to tie everything together. Everything below the surface of the liquid is treated the same, using softer colored lines to match the look and feel of the drink. Lots of spikes here, so let's speed this up for a moment. Finally, time for coloring. Red and green are complementary colors, while green and magenta are considered analogous colors, because magenta and red are in the same color family on the color wheel. I'm using 4 different magenta values, plus a little reddish hue I sampled from the margarita photo. The base color of the beverage itself will be darker than that of the cactus, but the cactus will have more dimension added, which means it'll use a wider range of those values. If that made no sense to you, let's put it this way. I'm making these 2 parts look as different as possible while still relying on the same colors. Maybe I'll make a color wheel explainer video someday. Anyway, just color it in a way that makes sense to you. Have fun. This is where creativity shines. The green next to the magenta is going to make this artwork pop. And that's something important about Nu Skool. It's supposed to be bright, vibrant, and it gets noticed. Here I'm using various green hues. Adding more yellow makes the color lighter and brighter, whereas mixing green with white would only create a dull tint and wouldn't have that wow factor. For the shine on the glass, I'm using the same technique I did in the neo-traditional cocktail tutorial. As a quick refresher, I created a new layer and laid down some white. Then I used my eraser tool with a hard-edged brush to erase lines that follow the shape of the glass itself. Then dropped the opacity until the white was just noticeable enough that it still allowed details to show through it. If this is too complicated, don't worry about it. This is an advanced step. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. With Nu Skool artwork, you can get away with having multiple light sources. Here, my main light source, or key light, is from the front, offset slightly to the upper left. So my highlights are closer to that area, while my shadows are positioned on the right, lower sides of all objects. My second light source, called the fill light, is less obvious. It's also from the front and helps keep the front of the objects out of shadow. I'll use this light later to add a shadow coming off the entire piece. But let's not stop there. Light source number 3 comes in the form of a reflection. The light hits the surface of the beverage and reflects the magenta color up on the underside of the parts above the liquid. It's a great way to break up the darker shadowy areas of the artwork and add some extra dimension. I have some extra space to fill, so I'll add a lime wedge. The lime has some very distinct textures, but I'm going to cheat a little. The skin is bumpy and porous, so by adding several green dots and U-shaped highlights, I can give the impression of texture. Only a small portion of the surface is at the right angle to catch highlights, so the dots stay subtle. The same is true for the inner part of the fruit, but this time the texture is longer and radiates from the center. This creates more linear highlights. With all the details in place, the glass, the cactus, the lime wedge, and those vibrant colors, this Nu Skool Prickly Pear Margarita is complete. Remember, Nu Skool is all about exaggeration. bold design choices, and having fun with your artwork. There's no right or wrong, kinda. So don't stress about making it perfect, just make it yours. Thanks for hanging out with me in this third installment in the cocktail series. If you enjoyed this, let me know in the comments what subject matter you'd like to see next. And just a little heads up, the next series will be all about birds. Until then, keep creating, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next video.